It's no secret that the British military is one of the most advanced in special operations forces today. A true trailblazer, they have led the way since World War II with the creation of the elite LRDG, the Long Range Desert Group, which preceded the modern SAS or Special Air Service, and specialised in surveillance, intelligence gathering, infiltration and extraction of other special units. Since the establishment of the LRDG, the British military has developed all sorts of techniques and procedures which are now used all over the globe. The most notable of these special units are the SAS, SBS, Special Boat Service, and SRR, Special Reconnaissance Regiment, the latter of which was the last to be established in 2005. The SAS and SBS are often tasked with counter-terrorism and dismantling hostage situations. They are described as being similar units to the US's Delta Force and SEAL Team 6, which work closely with their British counterparts. Meanwhile, the SRR is designed for gathering intel and specialises in the operational preparation of the battlefield. Though the members of these units are highly skilled and trained, there is a group of even more specialised SAS members. These individuals belong to a unit known as E Squadron, though members have also been known to call it the Increment. This secretive and highly classified group is believed to participate in numerous tasks for MI6 operations abroad, including acting as bodyguards, extracting assets, conducting surveillance and supporting covert operations in the likes of Russia and North Korea. All members of E Squadron are also known to work undercover, using aliases and backstories. A former MI6 officer, New Zealand-born Richard Tomlinson, penned a book in the late 1990s about his experiences with the British Secret Service. He detailed various operations MI6 had orchestrated, and claimed officers working within the MI6 had a license to kill. This was later confirmed by the head of the Secret Service at a public hearing. Indeed, E Squadron specifically had been likened to James Bond. In one specific section of his book, Tomlinson details that to qualify for the Increment, a certain amount of time must be served with MI6. Quote, SAS and SBS personnel must have served for at least 5 years and have reached the rank of sergeant. They are security vetted by MI6 and given a short induction course into the function and objectives of the service. If they have not already learnt surveillance skills, they take a 3-week course at the fort. Back at their bases in Hereford and Poole, their already substantial military skills are fine-tuned. They learn how to use improvised explosives and sabotage techniques, as well as advanced VIP protection skills, study guerrilla warfare organization, and practice advanced insertion techniques. For example, high-altitude parachuting from commercial aircraft, or covert landings from submarines. Advanced civilian qualifications are required. Several of the SBS Increment have commercial ship skippers tickets in their alias name, enabling them legally to hire, say, a fishing trawler. Recruiters for E Squadron are also known to choose a wide variety of individuals to fill vacancies, hiring from countries such as Fiji, Malta and Jamaica, as well as British citizens of India, Yemen and Nigeria, to name a few. Additionally, there is also regular recruitment of women into these positions, with hired individuals needing to be able to fit in anywhere easily. With one source telling The Sun, quote, "Women are often the best at this sort of work. If a group of blokes turns up, it always looks suspicious. We haven't had a female Bond in the films, but there are already lots in real life." A former MI6 and Increment officer turned author, Matthew Dunn, added, quote, "MI6 is not some elitist club. The officer has to be able to interact with any kind of person. You can't have people who have only lived in gentlemen's clubs environment. It's not like joining the household cavalry." Meanwhile, an anonymous former E Squadron officer told the media, quote, "We were moving in and out of countries on different passports, always in civvies, overseas all the time. It was busy. It was the James Bond stuff. Use your imagination." If MI6 members cope with a demanding environment and can complete multiple overseas deployments, they can be considered for a position within the E Squadron. However, it's not all action and counter-terrorism. Members need to be able to work alone and carry out more low-key tasks, such as prep work. If chosen for assessment, officers go on to pass further selection trials, including a difficult training course which requires potential members to have skills such as intelligence gathering, not just handiness with a gun. A former SBS member told Business Insider, quote, "You don't know a lot about them. There's a veil of secrecy, and guys who end up there just disappear. But honestly, that also happens in the regiment, and in my own old unit, and also at the SRR. Guys who you might be close mates with will go on an assignment, and you won't know where they are or what they're doing. It's standard and part of the job." The ex-member added, however, that the secrecy was on a completely different level with E Squadron in comparison to other units. The anonymous former E Squadron member we mentioned earlier also noted that MI5 and MI6 are, quote, always distancing themselves from James Bond. They aren't really like that. It's true, spies aren't really like James Bond. They're eggheads. Give them a gun, they wouldn't know what to do with it. E Squadron solves that problem, but they do a lot more as well. Though they are said to be the closest thing MI6 has to James Bond, and there is a license to kill, former members have argued that this license only applies within reason, stating, E Squadron are military people. They have rules of engagement. Is it a license to kill? It is certainly not carte blanche. But the nature of soldiering means it's sometimes necessary to take a life. Everyone is trained in deadly force. Matthew Dunn noted about his time with the Increment, quote, I was trained in close quarter and unarmed combat. I was good at it. I enjoyed it. Yes, there is an element of James Bond. There were no watches that could burn holes through walls, but you might have a letter with explosives in it that could blow off a door. Dunn recalled that his first mission was as a member of a unit targeting rogue states, and that officers were always eased into the job. They began with non-lethal operations, shadowing more experienced colleagues, before eventually stepping up to complete more risky and complex tasks. Eventually, he became an agent runner, meaning he was responsible for about 20 agents, many of whom would have been tortured and killed if they were ever exposed. Quote, as an intelligence officer, you are there to listen to an agent, to get them to reveal their secrets, and then quietly to leave the country and get back to London without all the guns and glory. A thing mostly ignored in popular fiction is the terribly close bond between an officer and his agents. I used to think of my agents as a family. In his biography for his website, Dunn wrote that he was trained in all aspects of intelligence collection and direct action, including agent running and debriefing, deep cover deployments, small arms, explosives, military armed combat, surveillance, advanced driving, infiltration and exfiltration techniques, and covert communications. He also notes that he conducted around 70 missions during his time with MI6, all of which were successful, and he was even awarded a personal commendation after completing a specific mission which reportedly ended an international incident. Commendations in MI6 are extremely rare. One major thing recruiters look for when selecting for E Squadron is an ability to blend in, which would allow unit members to more easily complete undercover work. While many recruited members can pass as foreign nationals and speak multiple other languages, Dunn was never one of those people, adding, quote, it's best not to bluff being a different nationality. You can sustain an accent for just over an hour, but after 4 hours, it goes. He recalled traveling under 12 separate aliases at one time. He was often alone and reliant on only himself, and stated that the loneliness was one of the most difficult parts of the entire operation. Quote, the loneliness, the isolation is the real thing. The moment you step on the plane, you are on your own. You are dealing with complex individuals with their own agendas. You are constantly asking, is this a setup? Meanwhile, Colin Armstrong, a member of Bravo 20, an SAS unit deployed to Iraq during the Gulf War, and who, along with his men, was subsequently left stranded in the desert following a failure of communication devices, noted that the level of skill required by E Squadron members was, quote, amazing even by SAS standards. Armstrong's name and that of his unit may sound familiar to you, as we previously covered the story of Bravo 20 in a separate video. Discussing E Squadron with The Sun, he added, quote, they undergo incredibly stringent security checks because they are entrusted with the most sensitive operations in the military. To be in the Increment is to be the best of the best. E Squadron's troops were reportedly some of the first British soldiers to be deployed to Afghanistan, long before the 2001 US invasion. They were sent to accompany an MI6 officer looking to speak with anti-Taliban tribesmen. Later, in 2011, the unit was also known to be involved in the 2011 overthrowing of Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi. It is one of the few operations that E Squadron was known to be involved in. The unit was sent to Libya along with other MI6 members, but was reportedly double-crossed by the contacts they'd planned to meet. Reportedly, though they were heavily armed, Squadron members declined to open fire as MI6 wanted to recruit the revolutionaries, and they believed open firing might alienate them. Instead, the unit allowed themselves to be apprehended. They were imprisoned in the city of Benghazi until the British ambassador intervened, and they were subsequently released. Stephen Mitchell, also known by a pseudonym Andy McNabb, is another former member of the unit. You may recognize his name, as he was the commanding officer for Bravo 20 and was the first to publish a book about the incident just a few years after returning from Iraq. Mitchell spent 3 years as a member of E Squadron, although back then in the 1990s, it was actually called the SAS's Revolutionary Warfare Wing. Mitchell recalled, quote, "There was such a mad variety of operations that you got up to. It was whatever the intelligence service needed. Sometimes you'd be armed, but sometimes you couldn't, because you couldn't have a weapon where you were going. Sometimes you'd pick up the weapons when you got there. Sometimes you'd work with the spies. Sometimes you'd preempt them." Mitchell noted that he'd been picked in part due to his history of undercover operations, several of which had been carried out in Northern Ireland. He had also participated in one operation with the SAS and one with a special reconnaissance regiment, which back then was called 14 Intelligence. Mitchell backed up what another anonymous source had already said, that MI6 was nothing like what James Bond did, but that E Squadron was. According to Matthew Dunn, things have grown difficult for MI6 in recent years due to new ethical challenges, like collaborating with those who may use torture. He stated, quote, "The issue of collaborating with people who may use torture has made the work of MI6 officers very difficult. The service maintains that torture largely doesn't work because the person tells you what you want to hear. If an officer was in that situation where they could overhear or see torture, I would expect them to walk out and report it. We don't use torture, and we must maintain these morals overseas. Of course, it is very hard for the field officer. There are situations in which your morality is tested to the limit, yet you have to walk away with dignity." In 2021, however, things took a turn for E Squadron and the British Ministry of Defence as a whole when an email containing the promotions of officers, including those in special missions units, was accidentally sent across the government. Among the long list of names included members of the SAS, SBS, SRR and Special Forces Support Group, as well as members of E Squadron. The details of over 70 officers in Special Ops were released in the spreadsheet of 1,200 names, with some of those names being linked to 22 SAS ESQN. Notably, this is the first written proof that the unit exists. The bungling of this document likely spelled trouble for those undercover. It's possible many officers were taken out of action and sidelined from future operations following the exposure of their identities. However, given the secrecy of the unit, it's unlikely we will know for certain what the ramifications are. Notably, even those who leave MI6 voluntarily and in good standing can still be haunted by the things they have experienced while working for the government. In 2001, Matthew Dunn quit the MI6 so that he could focus on raising a family. In 2008, he and his wife divorced and he continued to look after his 2 young children. During his interview with The Telegraph in 2011, not long after his first book Spartan launched, he spoke of how difficult it had been for him to return to normal civilian life, stating, quote, "It's taken me about 10 years to adjust to leaving. It's not like a soldier coming back from the front. SAS is still all around you, but you are no longer in it. You go to a restaurant and there are certain habits, checking the entrances and exits, the table spacing. I still think that way, sometimes not through paranoia, just because you do. Then I find I don't need to be like that."